Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and this presentation is titled The United Airlines Pilot Strike in 1985, Two Groups That Saved Our Butts. The first group is a group of pilots that they had hired to be strike breakers. At least that was the company's idea. And we called them the 570 because there were, now this is clever, 570 of them. And in the end, only a very few actually crossed the picket lines. They understood that it wouldn't be for their benefit or their career benefit or the benefit of the organization if they crossed. And I agreed with that. The other one, of course, is the Association of Flight Attendants. Now, they knew about strikes and everything. We didn't have to convince them of the importance of, solidarity. But I'll talk about what they did also later. So, we're having these teleconferences, and May 16th, the day before the strike, which was May 17th, we were still hopeful that, maybe things would be resolved. A lot of times, these things happen at the last minute. They go up to the wire, and then they have a solution. Well, unfortunately, that did not happen. But there was a requirement, apparently, that all of the pilots to get on the seniority list, even though they were striking, had to sign in at EXO at the airline headquarters there in Chicago. So we had buses and we took them over there and we got them signed in. But I was working at the strike center, and we had this one last group of 6 pilots who were just a little bit late getting in, and they needed to go over and sign in. Well, the buses were all gone. We're getting ready to go to the teleconference that evening, and these guys needed to sign in. So what I did was I took my trusty airport car, which is the car I had there in Chicago. I commuted out of Wichita at the time, and it actually didn't look as good as this one. It was pretty ratty. And I piled all the guys in there, and I had to drive them over to EXO to sign in. Well, we're coming up to the guard gate there, and of course we have to tell them what we're doing there and stuff. And I said, okay, nobody laugh, everybody keep quiet. Pulled up to the gate there, and I go, "Hi, we're jet pilots. We're here to fly your airplanes. We hear you have some really big airplanes, and we've never flown big airplanes like that before. And we are excited. Where do we go? Where do we go? We had to sign in. Where do we go?" And the guard gate individual kind of looks at me and kind of motions, and I can see the look on his face, because I think a lot of the employee groups weren't necessarily so happy at what the company was doing as far as some of the people they were bringing in that were called fleet quals. They were qualified to fly the fleet. Yes, a good group. Not. All right. The night goes, we get to midnight, the strike doesn't settle, and we're picketing. So we're out there. We're picketing. Weren't supposed to picket in uniform. The company tried everything they could do. They all sorts of threatening of being fired. Now, some people did cross the picket line and go to work, but the requirements, I guess, to work during the strike were pretty onerous. You had to have very bushy eyebrows and big noses. So I guess only extremely ugly people actually went to work. At least that's what it appears from some of the photographs. Of course, the flight attendants who honored the strike were much better looking. Now, I received a letter from our senior VP of flight operations, and here's that last little sentence there. I was 10 from the bottom of the seniority list, and it said it could be several years, if ever, before striking pilots are returned. And I figured, even though he says not seniority here, because if you break the union, seniority goes away, but I figured I was a junior guy, not that very valuable, and my coming back, well, I figured my airline career was virtually over before it started. So I got my old job back, and here's me out at Boeing, out at the antenna range. I was lead engineer in the microwave technology group, and I got my old job back, and there's my United Airlines brown uniform. That's the uniform coat there. I figured I might as well get my money's worth. I had paid about $300 for this, which at the time was half a month's pay, so might as well get my use out of it, because I figured my career was over, so might as well go back to a job that I really enjoyed, and I did well at. And I figured, well, that was going to be my career as electrical engineer. But what happened was they announced a tentative agreement. Now they like to do this, they get your hopes up. It's called whipsawing. They get your hopes up and they down them again. And that had happened on several cycles. But we're 29 days into the strike. And, we weren't the Teamsters. We were the Airline Pilots Association. We're not the Airline Pilots Union. We're not like the Teamsters where you go around breaking kneecaps and stuff like that. So, I think they were starting to get worried that people might start to cross. And of course, once the flood gates open, the whole thing could have been done. And we had made an agreement that we were not going to come back unless the flight attendants came back. Well, we could see that they were using this, trying to whipsaw, and they got nervous. And what they did was they had the head of the Flight Attendants Association Union at headquarters, and they decided that, well, we needed to get this back to work. We'd work with the flight attendants afterwards. So the head of the flight attendants went out. They took her out of there, actually sneaked her out of headquarters back door, took her down to a TV studio, and she announced on TV that they were relieving the pilots of their commitment to bring the flight attendants back at the same time. Well, you can't run an airline without gate agents, without mechanics, without flight attendants. So, the company had to bring him back. It wasn't really much of a threat there. And, of course, they came back in short order after the strike. But that ended the strike. Now, one thing I'd like to comment about is, not all pilots get through training. Every once in a while there can be a problem. And like I said, I spent $300 on my uniform. And supposedly there was, this is a little side, there was a very clever pilot who wanted to get his money back because, you fired him. I want to get my money back for my uniform, and the company wouldn't give it back to him. So, and this isn't him, this is a stock photo. So he decided he'll take the uniform, he'll wear it, he'll go to one of the local bars next to O'Hare there and have some beers in his uniform. Well, funny thing, I guess the company decided after all they were going to buy the uniform back. And then one last thing, of course, we had this program of interns, people that were kind of brought on to be pilots, and they were shown, what it was like to be an airline pilot and stuff like that, and they would ride on the jump seats. Well, my son became an intern. He worked down at Miami, but of course he could ride on the jump seat, so I had him ride on my jump seat. This is a couple years after the strike, but a lot of the pilots believe that these interns were just kind of scabs in waiting, that the company was trying to get interested, and give all the company propaganda so that if we had another strike, they'd have another group ready to cross. So a lot of the pilots were kind of suspicious about this, and it was kind of interesting. We had this one gate agent in Milwaukee who didn't like pilots very much, and I told my son when he was jump seating, he had to go out and he had to give a jump seating ticket, and I said, just go out, give it to the agent, and then come back. Well, he goes out there, and I notice that he's not coming back, which is a little strange. Well, the agent decides, the agent controls the jump seat. Well, no, he doesn't. The captain controls the jump seat, and he's not going to let my son come back down. Well, he didn't know that this guy was my son. And I told my son that if you have trouble, getting back into the cockpit, and you need to be there to see what's going on. That's part of the training. I said, if you have trouble back, just tell him you need to talk to the captain. And they should let you on. And he said several times that he needed to talk to the captain. And just as I decided, hey, what's going on here? I got out of my seat and I came forward. Just as I opened the door, I heard him say, I need to talk to the captain. He's my father. And then I could see the guy's jaw drop. And it was like, oh, okay, well, I kind of screwed up there. So I said, Mark, come on down. So he came on down. And then he goes and he flies with some other people. And there was a friend of mine, good ALPA volunteer, and I had been, of course, active in ALPA quite a bit. And I'll call him Jeff, not by the bay. And so he rides on Jeff's cockpit, and they get up and cruise, and Jeff turns around and he starts talking to him about, strikes and the importance of the union and all this stuff. And my son says, obviously, you don't know who my father is. And so they had a good laugh about that. My son comes back and tells me that. And then I meet Jeff in the hallway, and he says, guess who I had on the jump seat? And I said, yeah, I heard about it. But anyway, that's the story about how two groups saved our posterior during the strike. And if they hadn't come through and done what they did, the strike could have gone a very different way and probably would not worked out as well as it did. Anyway, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.